Hey guys, this is Chris from Mixdownonline.com. Today I want to show you how to get a big, fat, huge drum sound using Trigger 2, a plugin from Steven Slate. Let's get to it. So now I just opened an old session that I recorded a few years ago. So let's listen to what we have. Okay, cool. So this is actually the original sound recording without any compression, EQ whatsoever. What I want to do here is work on the snare and the kick drum. I kind of find the snare a bit thin and dead, and I'm not that crazy about the kick drum sound as well. So let's beef the sound up a bit only by working with the kick drum and the snare drum by using the sound replacement technique. So Trigger 2 will be my way to go plugin to do so. I will first work on my kick drum, and I'm gonna find a very nice sample that is gonna help us to beef up that sound. So first I'm gonna duplicate the track, and I am gonna name this track Trigger. Alright, Trigger bass drum, and there you go. I'm gonna go and insert the plugin. I'm gonna put this in solo, and I'm gonna load some samples. So I'm gonna use the Dat Sound drum sound bank, which I like a lot. These guys are amazing. They produce nice samples. So I am gonna go into the preset folder because they already have some presets for Trigger. I am gonna use the kicks folder here, and I am gonna load a few kick drums. So let's start with this one. All right, now the beauty of Trigger is you can actually load up to 8 samples. So you can have 8 samples playing at the same time if you want. You don't have to, but you know, you have the freedom to do it. So you can mix that with some room sounds and dry sounds, whatever you want. And let's try this one as well. So I have 3 kick drums. Okay, now I am gonna go into the triggering section, and I'm gonna start by playing the track. So I am going to bring the detail knob a bit down just so it catches all the transients of the kick drum. Perfect, that sounds good. There's a lot of other options I can play with in Trigger, but I'm not going to cover them all in this tutorial, except for the gate option, which is pretty cool. So there's a gate that you can activate directly on Trigger. So, perfect. So we have our kick drum. Let's blend this with the original kick and to see how it sounds. Okay, so now we have a phase problem. So let's fix that. Let's go back into Trigger. So there's a phase option here. You can reverse the phase by clicking on these phase button right here. So I'm going to reverse the phase out of these 3 samples. So let's listen. Perfect. So that sounds way better. So let's lower this down a bit. All right, so now let's work on the snare drum. You know what? Even before that, we're gonna add some room to our kick drum. So to do that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use Trigger again, and load some room samples. But I want my room samples to be stereo. So I am gonna create an effects send channel and load trigger out of that channel. So I'm gonna rename that track trigger kick and room. There we go. And I am gonna load a few room samples out of the same sound bank. So let's use this. Okay, I really like this one. So I'm gonna load an overhead sample and 2 room samples. Perfect. So let's go back in the triggering section and let's send our kick drum to that channel. Make sure it's activated and select the trigger kick room FX channel, and make sure when you send a signal that you send it pre-fader, because when you're going to be playing with your bass drums fader, you don't want it to affect the amount of signal sent to the effects channel track. So let's have a listen. Let's bring down the detail knob. Okay, let's keep it this way for now. I'm gonna work on my snare drum. So let's listen to the snare by itself. So for this one, I'm gonna use a technique here with trigger. And I am gonna first create, let's go and create an effects channel track like we just did for the kick drum. Load trigger 2. Rename that as snare. And I am going to use a preset that I worked on a few hours ago. So in that preset, I loaded 3 different dry snare sounds and an overhead mic and 2 room samples. And so let's send that to the trigger snare effects channel. So on this part, we have some snare hits that are very low in volume, so trigger has a hard time to read them. In this case, we need to bring down the detail knob a bit. So by bringing that detail knob lower, trigger is able to detect all the kick drum hits that were recorded in the snare microphone during the recording, which is not good because we don't want trigger to be replacing these hits with the snare sample. First, I can actually activate a gate. So let's bring that up a bit. So this is actually where I can hear the ghost notes. Nice, so that sounds pretty good, but let's try something else. Let's try to work with the suppress option here, okay? So for that to work, I'm gonna need to send the kick directly into the snare trigger plugin. Okay, so this way, trigger will read that kick drum and basically remove it, so that all the kick hits that were recorded in the snare microphone are not going to be triggered, and that trigger will not replace these hits with samples. Okay, if that makes any sense. So let me show you. What I need to do is to go back here on my kick drum and send the signal to that effects trigger snare channel that I created for the snare. So then I'm gonna have to pan that signal to the far right, so it goes directly into the second input channel of trigger. And for the snare drum, I'm gonna need to make sure the signal is panned to the far left, so it goes into the first input channel of trigger. So now if I go and open my plugin, notice that the kick drum will enter into the second input on the right side and the snare on the first input, which is the left side input of trigger. So there you go. So whatever comes into the second channel of trigger, the right side channel, will be suppressed if I bring the suppress knob up. So let's try it. So there you go. Now I can actually bring the detail knob lower, so it can catch all the transients out of the snare drum. Alright, so now I can play with the amount of snare and kick that I want. Alright, so now if I find that there's not a lot of room, I can add more room by playing with the room level here. So at this stage, when I'm happy with the sound, what I usually do is I go and bounce all the overhead and room samples into a stereo track. And then I do the same with the snare that I bounce into a mono track this time. And this way I can have separate control over the tracks and treat them differently if I need to. So now let's go back and listen to what we had at first compared to what we have now. All right, and let's listen to what we have right now. So cool, so now we have a brand new drum sound, only by blending the original kick drum with a kick sample, and by replacing the snare drum with a snare sample, and all of this before the actual mix, so before adding EQ and compression. At this point you can actually experiment more if you want. You can blend the original snare signal with the snare sample, so feel free to do whatever you want. I hope that helps. Don't forget to subscribe and leave some comments. If you want to reach me, go on mixdownonline.com. Thanks for watching. See you next time.